Great. Good evening. We're calling to order the Marin County mayors and council members. We're beginning with the city selection committee agenda. Today is Wednesday, April 22nd. We are here in the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority boardroom. Rebecca, can we have a roll call, please?
Thank you. Belvedere is absent. Corte Madera. Here. We have Fred Casisa for Mayor Rosa Thomas. Fairfax. We have Mayor Stephanie Hellman. Larkspur. Here. We have Vice Mayor Gabe Paulson for Stephanie Andre. Mill Valley.
Here.
We have Stephen Burke for Mayor Max Perry. Nevada.
Here.
We have Mayor Rachel Farrak. Ross.
Here.
We have Julie McMillan. San Anselmo.
Here.
We have Mayor Steve Burdo. San Rafael is absent. Sausalito. We may have Stephen Woodside at some point, but he is not here yet. Okay, thank you.
And Alice Fredericks just showed up. Oh, okay. Who's the current mayor? Okay. Okay. All right, moving on. Let's open the public comment. Yes. Any members of the public wish to speak? Damien, do you have any hands raised?
We do not have any hands raised from online.
How many attendees online, just out of curiosity? Okay, thank you. All right, closing public comment. Acceptance of the minutes for the October 22nd, 2025 City Selection Committee. I'll move. Thank you. Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? Hearing none, motion passes. Moving on to item 4, consideration and possible recommendation of appointment of one MCCMC primary representative to the Marin County Local Agency Formation Commission, otherwise known as Marin LAFCO. The incumbent is Councilmember Barbara Kohler from Fairfax. There's one seat with a 4-year term that will expire May 1, 2026. And as of this point in time, we've received one letter of interest received from Mayor Kohler.
Vice Mayor.
Excuse me, Council Member. Council Member Kohler. Are we at the deadline for accepting? Yes, we are. So unless there's any other last minute submissions this evening, we can entertain a motion to appoint Ms. Kohler, Councilmember Kohler.
So move.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? We have to do ballot? Yeah. Okay. Well, we want to follow the rules. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, we have very strict city selection committee rules. And this is my. Sure.
I need a pen too. I'll take one too from you. Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you.
Bye, Pence.
put my name on the. there, so.
Thank you for keeping us compliant, Rebecca. Much appreciated. Unanimous 7 votes supporting the appointment of Barbara Kohler. Jalafko. Congratulations, Barbara. I know she'll be joining us soon. Okay, moving on to announcements. Any subject not on the agenda may be presented at this time by members of the City Selection Committee. These topics cannot be acted upon or discussed, but may be agendized for a later meeting date. Does anyone have any future agenda items? Ladies? Do we have any announcements or that's okay?
Meeting for the purpose of ABAG.
So the regional appointments to ABAG and primary and alternate. So we'll convene as a city select committee next month on the 27th of May. Thank you, Rebecca. Does anyone else have any announcements or future topics for MCCMC? No. Okay. So we can adjourn and we will move on to the regular meeting. I'm going to get that packet. Okay, calling to order the regular monthly MCCMC meeting. I'm seeing some colleagues walk in the room. Welcome. If you're an elected council member or mayor, could you please sit at the table, but please get refreshments or what have you beforehand. Rebecca, can we do a roll call, please, now that we have some additional folks in the room? And while you're getting settled, I really want to welcome everyone here. This is our first time in this meeting, in this room.
Okay. Belvedere? Corte Madera?
Here.
Fairfax?
Here.
Larkspur? Mill Valley? Novato?
Here.
Ross?
Here.
San Anselmo?
Here.
San Rafael? Absent. Sausalito? Tiburon?
Here.
Thank you.
Any members of the public wish to comment on items not on the agenda? Any hands raised?
I am not seeing any hands raised from online attendees, and we currently have 5 online attendees.
Okay, we'll close public comment. Welcome again, everyone. So we just had the announcement related to the ABAG primary and alternate positions that will both have 2-year terms. So look forward to that next month. We have the draft agenda included in the packet for the 27th of May. We have consideration of possible approval of the draft minutes of the March 25th, 2026 meeting, regular meeting. If somebody wants to make a motion for that, I'll entertain a motion for the approval of those minutes.
Second.
Do I have a second?
Yeah, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, minutes approved. Moving on to item 5, the committee reports. we, as the ad hoc governance subcommittee, looking at updating our bylaws, which everyone should be aware of from the last few meetings we've discussed. There is a draft redlined version as part of the packet. That's where we are at this point in time. So if you haven't looked at it, please take a look at it. We are not going to review it this evening, but we do plan to take an action item on it next month. Is that right, Gabe? Okay. So please do take a look because they're not major changes, but they are significant enough that we want to make sure we have all eyeballs on them. We also have an ad hoc subcommittee to recruit and recommend a new secretary treasurer. Rebecca's with us through the end of next month. We have to date about 10 applicants. So those who stepped forward for the subcommittee to interview and appoint, we will be convening and looking at those applications soon. So look out for the doodle poll for your availability related to that. And then the rest are written reports. And if anybody here wants to highlight anything, please feel free. Go ahead, Pat.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. There's two things I wanted to highlight. One on the ABAG report. If you haven't gone into it, ABAG and the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority has developed a housing portal. Really encourage you to take a look at this. This is availability of housing throughout the Bay Area. And it's also, you can find out what's affordable and, they have a range of affordability. Really encourage you to take a look at it. On the BCDC report, I really urge folks, and if this can be in the minutes, to let me know by email or by calling me, to let me know what they think about the multi-use path on the Santa Fe Richmond Bridge. That's something that BCDC takes an action on. I'd sure like to know what our cities feel like, and I will be asking the same for Sonoma County since I represent both. Also I wanted to encourage folks also to participate in the Regional Shoreline Adaptation Plan webinar that's scheduled for April 29th, and the date and the links and everything is in the report. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me or give me a call. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you for all the work. Okay, now we are at the time we're waiting for. We have County Executive Derek Johnson with us. He's going to provide a presentation on what's happening with his organization. And Derek, thank you again for your graciousness. We ran out of time for you last month and really appreciate you being here. So yeah, we can, if you want to roll the podium like up here or just whatever feels like yeah, maybe that way. Yeah.
Can you all hear me? Okay, great. Thank you first off, thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate being here tonight. And I know you had a full program last time, so I really appreciate the return invitation for me to come back and give you an update on what's going on at the county and more specifically, what's going on just in general with the reorganization at the county in my office. I just do want to point out a couple of my team members that are here tonight. First, I just want to recognize Supervisor Moulton Peters, our Vice President of the board here tonight. We have Deputy County Executive Lynn Walsh. We have D'Angelo Pillay, who's our county manager down in Marin City, and my assistant, Veronica Hurd, who takes care of all of my calendar and makes sure that I'm at the right place with the right materials, and that's how I got here tonight. So very appreciative of her. So I've been on a little bit of a traveling trip. I just came back on behalf of Marin County, along with Supervisor, President of the Board, Lucan, and Supervisor Colbert, along with our legislative team, spending 2 days in Washington, D.C. So I'm fresh off the plane last night, got in to SFO, and got home around midnight last night. So I'm a little fatigued after 2 days of spending time up on the Hill, lobbying on behalf of Marin County in general, including all of the cities, about various different aspects of federal legislation and funding requests that we are putting in front of, or hope to put in front of, the federal government. We were particularly thankful to Congressman Huffman, who we had the chance to meet with, and thank him for his support, for example, in Fairfax, San Anselmo, for his support of the Children's Center, we were able to meet with Senator Schiff and thank him for some projects that they are bringing forward. As you know, it's a very complicated time right now in Washington, D.C., so a lot happening. So I would say probably more than anything, we really learned about that complexity. And I would say my takeaway is that there is still a lot of volatility out there in terms of what can happen, ultimately can impact Marin County writ large. But I thought I'd start off with that tonight because it's top of mind. A very successful trip, and you may or may not have known that, up until a couple of years ago, we didn't really have a legislative presence. And so with the talented Deputy County Executive Talia Smith and her team, we've really now been able to project the voice of all of Marin County, including the cities, to make sure that all of our interests are heard at the highest levels in Washington, D.C. So I think hopefully one of my friends can advance the slide for me tonight. If you wouldn't mind doing that, that would be great. Thank you, Rebecca. So I'm going to jump ahead and jump right in if you want to advance it to the next slide. So, I want to talk a little bit tonight about just the significant changes that the Board of Supervisors made back in 2023 when they shifted from a county administrator to county executive position. It was, I would say, at least from my research, one of the most significant changes in county government in 70 years to the county administrator. So you may or may not know that up until that change, I think, Supervisor Moulton Peters has probably talked to you all in greater details. The majority of department heads reported directly to the 5 Board of Supervisors. So as you can imagine, making strategy, accountability, work programs would be difficult. Imagine all of you, not having a city manager, but having 10 plus department heads that all reported to you directly, and then trying to then reconcile that with your colleagues, which we all know the only way you can do that is through a notice meeting. So you can imagine there might have been things that were lost in translation. And so, I was very happy to see the change and shift in role. And so now tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the ideas that I've been socializing around, some of the challenges and pressure points that we have in Marin County, and how do we unite around this concept of one Marin, and how do we unite our cities and towns and unincorporated communities into kind of a common cause for the future, and how do we live up to our aspirations to leave a better Marin County than we found it, because I think ultimately that is our charge. But more practically, how do we make it easier to navigate as a customer or as the public, ways to get services from Marin County? And most importantly, how do we deliver on results? We live in a very expensive area, and we pay a fair amount of taxes to live here, and so people should expect those results. And so part of the work that I'm doing right now, and you may have heard about some of that, our partnership with KPMG to take a look for the first time in decades, how are we delivering services, and what are the gaps in services, and what do we need to do to meet those needs? And then with the county executive structure, one of the key areas is clarity, accountability, ease of access, and then most importantly, unified service. How do we make sure that there are no, closed doors, we don't send people to the wrong door? And most importantly, areas like the capital improvement program, how do we make sure that we're coordinating, the orderly development in community development with our capital improvement program, for example, and making sure that those are synchronized? And so I'll be bringing forward on May 13th and presenting to the board on May 18th our very first unified capital improvement program for the county of Marin. And so you'll start to see some of that synergy, coming together. So next slide. So I committed early on in this process of reorganizing the office, to really seek a lot of input because, undergoing this level of significant kind of structural process and systems changes is no small feat. Most reorganizations fail. About 70% of them fail. So I brought in some trusted partners and started off with a steering committee of employees and employee labor groups to help guide and help navigate. We developed a scope of work, and I engaged some partners and some retired county executive from Sacramento County to make a recommendation on the structure. We reviewed that scope of work. We looked at different alternatives, and we presented a variety of different reorganization alternatives to the Board of Supervisors. And then eventually, right now we're in the process of implementing the preferred models. We're monitoring and measuring the efficacy of the investment because it was significant investment in terms of the resources that I ultimately recommended to the Board of Supervisors. And so we've been doing that on a regular basis. And I'm going to talk about some of the early wins that we've seen from the reorganization and the investments that have been made by the board and based upon my recommendations. Next slide. So organizational structure, right now I'm in the process of recruiting and appointing some assistant county executives. So the board, previously we had 2 assistant county executives. The board made a decision to expand that to 4, and that was based upon, looking at a benchmarking counties across California. It was very clear that, me having 34 direct reports was not going to be set up for success. And I would say also on top of that, the assistant county executives previously didn't have any sort of functional oversight over many of the different departments. They ran programs or they were largely special project managers, but they didn't have kind of the wingspan to oversee, for example, law and justice, for example, or community and environment. That would include Community Development Agency and Department of Public Works. And so there was an orderly grouping of departments that made sense to really create that synergy and cooperation so we would align effort and resources in the most effective way. And so some of the cross-departmental initiatives that we've already been able to undertake, and maybe you've seen this adorned on some of the buses that are traveling through Marin County or some of the lawn signs. We've launched Fix It Marin, and I'll talk about that more in greater detail, which is bringing essentially services to your phone. I think San Rafael has an app like this, and I know my team is eager to potentially work with all the cities to potentially extend Fix It Marin to all the incorporated areas as well. So we have a unified system in which, people don't really care in Marin County if you're a public person, if you're in Belvedere or in, Fairfax. They just want a simple way to fill a pothole. And so we can provide that mechanism throughout Marin County when we want to be of service in that way. We're in the process of implementing CalAIM across Marin County, which is essentially across our county divisions to make sure that we've got a coordinated way to provide, services, particularly for those that are in the criminal justice system. You may have seen a significant amount of deferred maintenance that's being addressed at the Marin Civic Center campus. So it began with restoring the blue luster to the roof, but that was just the beginning. We need to replace all the skylights. We need to restore the cafe. The skylights are now 50 years old. They're plexiglass and they leak. So there's actually a bucket brigade that goes out there when it rains, and it doesn't really, provide a great look. I was just amazed when I was in Washington, D.C., the quality of their buildings and the civic pride, and then coming back to the Marin Civic Center and just recognizing that there's a lot of need for us to spruce up, because we're ultimately stewards of that facility. And so we want to make sure that we do that with pride. As I mentioned before, adopting a comprehensive capital improvement plan for Marin County. You're going to hear from our colleagues tonight in greater detail at the Marin Community Foundation more about climate adaptation and resilience. And so the county has announced its first chief climate officer. She's coming from the state of New York, and she will be on behalf of the county, working with all of the cities to try to coordinate climate efforts, not only on greenhouse gas reduction, but on our resiliency and adaptation efforts, you know, along both the bay and along the ocean side. We have a lot of ongoing recruitments underway. We've established a civilian oversight commission and an inspector general to make sure making sure we're doing the best we can in terms of sheriff services. We're in the process of hiring an economic vitality manager. And then I mentioned the chief climate officer. So next slide. Linking our priorities, just to remind you, and we'll go through this quickly. You know, our mission is a safe, sustainable, healthy, and equitable communities. There are four kind of pillars which guide us. Next slide. These are our community priorities. So we are, for the first time, bringing forward, and I'll talk about this in greater detail. These are the 6 priorities of the Board of Supervisors. They're probably all familiar with you. They've been our priority for a number of years. What is going to be different is, and I'll show you in a minute, is we are creating unified work programs across all 22 departments so that all departments are rowing in the same direction to try to achieve the goals for the board and on behalf of the county. You know, so for example, disaster preparedness, there is a role for virtually every single department, and one of those tasks is going to be for the next 2 years as we adopt the emergency operations plan, which will be the emergency operations plan for the county and all of the cities as well, is what are we going to do to train all of our staff? What are we going to do to make sure that we've got the organizational readiness to carry out our emergency operations plan when our community needs it most? Next slide. Prioritizing vital infrastructure. You may be familiar with this facility. It's out on the corner of Nicasio and Sir Francis Drake. That is the old golf clubhouse, which will be the future site of the headquarters for the Marin County Fire Department. You know, we're currently stationed in Woodacre, which is, you know, a constellation of old buildings built in the 1800s and 1900s. It's not really a suitable location for running operations, particularly given the challenges in the 21st century. We're going to be building a new facility there. We'll be doing it in a different approach than we've ever done it in the past, using a design build approach, which we believe, based upon my team able to innovate and come up with new ideas, could save the taxpayers anywhere from $3.5 to $7 million in costs by delivering it a different way than we've done in the past, and potentially deliver this, you know, project years in advance than we otherwise could. So we actually had a community meeting on Monday night, soliciting input on the design. That's another area that we're really trying to refine our way that we do business, is doing a heavy amount of community engagement on the front end. I know all of you at cities, you're used to that, but it's not necessarily a muscle that we have built up very well at the county. And having come from cities, I'm trying to build that here at the county as well. Next slide. So community infrastructure, what's our vision, is really around a stewardship of assets from the backbone, you know, to providing public as a backbone for public service delivery, making sure that we've got an inventory eventually of all of our roads, bridges, drainage facilities, parks, and libraries, and we have a comprehensive understanding of all the deferred maintenance. So the county, we have roughly about 50 bridges with an average age of over 70 years. And so my public works director, Chris Blunk, did the math. We think we have about $1.5 billion worth of bridges that we're probably going to have to replace over the ensuing decades. And so that capital improvement plan is going to start some of that work now to really assess a lot of our assets, including our bridges, to make sure that these aren't surprises or don't fail at an inopportune time. And that goes for all of these other facilities as well. Next slide. So what are our goals for infrastructure? Protect and preserve existing assets. That's our number one priority. Our second one is invest in safety and resilience of these facilities. And then the third one is enhance community-facing assets for equity and access. So it's really kind of maintain, what you got, replace what you got, and then build the new stuff. And that's a prioritization scheme that I've used in the past. Next slide. You may have read about some of our work, at the VMA. I can fondly remember going to this facility when I was a young kid to see shows with my grandparents. It's nearing 50 years old. It was literally sinking into the bay. And so it had nearly $25 million worth of improvements that we're making in total in this facility. We plan on reopening. I just heard from the team that we're on schedule to open this facility early in January 2027. You will start to see a lot of marketing that's showing up in your mailbox and in print media. We hired the same firm, I think, Stephen, it's located down in your city, BSSP, that does a lot of the marketing for the Warriors, because we need to, bringing this facility back to life and getting people back in seats is going to be important to make sure that it's safe. And so be on the lookout. We're hoping to have 3 days of opening acts in January 2027. It's a significant reinvestment, to restore the luster of this building, this facility. It really needed a lot of love and care to get it back to a condition that we could have, children and families and older adults enjoying it. Some other projects that I talked about, the design for the fire headquarters in San Geronimo Valley. We have some work up in Novato and flood control district. We are working on a comprehensive plan for improvements of our libraries branches. And then right now, we're also in the process of developing a comprehensive master plan and capital improvement plan for the fairgrounds. Largely, there are, as part of the fair, we do have farm animals that come there and shows, and we don't really have the proper facilities for the full range of what we need to do. We also know that the summers are getting hotter, and in order to have a really, a fair that's really welcoming, we probably need to have better facilities. And so we're going to be doing some imagination for the long term of how do we, realize all the investments there. The one item that's not on there is, and I'll be bringing a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors on the 18th of May, is our partnership with the Farmers Market to finally build and realize the dream of building a purposely built farmers market at the Christmas tree lot there on Highway 101, so that Marin County has a proper, I would say, venue to meet our world-class farmers market with, purposely built facilities. Next slide. And we hope to break ground on that in July of 2026 and have it completed before the fair in July of 2027. So you're going to see a lot of reactivation at the Marin Civic Center campus. I talked a little bit about some of the outcomes that we've seen related to early investments by the board. I want to talk a little bit about our digital innovation and transformation. There's a lot of opportunity that we have here at the County of Marin. I talked about Fix It Marin. We are 85% ahead of schedule. I'll talk some data more. We think we've saved about $250,000 in terms of being more efficient and effective in service calls and getting people out there timely with the right resources in the right way. We've unlocked some staff capacity in our community development agency using AI and other tools to save anywhere from $1,800 to $3,000 a year by automating some of our workflows and processing permits more effectively. We have some costware savings in terms of looking at our software systems and auditing those for duplication and be more effective. We think we saved nearly $4.5 million. We have been very actively to try to get everyone on marincounty.gov We had departments that are on a variety of different websites at the county. So you would think you're going to the county website, and lo and behold, the sheriff had their own website, HHS had their website, and so it was very difficult to have a centralized location for the public. And so we were able to migrate all of H8 stuff in 90 days, and it was 95% faster than we've done in the past. We are implementing an innovation culture in Marin County. We've got an innovation team that has trained over 60 people through kind of boot camps to learn how to optimize some of our systems. And so you can read all the rest. The last one is that the Board of Supervisors, as part of its budget for 26 and 28, will be adopting key performance indicators. So we're measuring our performance on an ongoing basis, as I promised I'd do to the board at the outset when they made these investments. Go ahead, next slide, please. Here's some more details, as I promised, about Fix It Marin. You can see some of the details. We have some work to do there. 60% of the participant met expectations. Eventually, we'll be establishing kind of a baseline of what that looks like. We've resolved nearly 552 different tickets. I think I submitted some last week as I was riding my bike through Marin County. I think we're up to about 1,800 submittals in total. So some of them we can't address right away. Some of them come in, fix this intersection, which requires a whole lot of engineering. So some of them we can't resolve immediately or requires a capital improvement program. But at least now the public has a way to engage with their government more seamlessly and in real time. Next slide. You've probably heard that we've been doing a fair amount of outreach with many different cities, particularly, in the face of a lot of the immigration enforcement, trying to let people know about their rights. The board has been very active in funding to make sure, particularly our NGO partners, have the resources to support our immigrant community. If there are removal cases here in Marin County, we think we've had roughly about 65 in the last year, and sometimes that separates families, and sometimes some of the families who are the prime income earners in those families. And so we've had a strong partnership with MCF and other NGOs to really make sure we're centering people and taking care of people. All of this work really began with knowing your rights and making sure people understood their rights and their responsibilities early on. And so there's a lot more work to be done. I'll be bringing forward the budget to the board on May 18th for adoption in June, and we'll be recommending an additional $500,000 appropriation, perhaps more. We've received some late requests from NGOs to make sure those NGOs are supported for this important work over the ensuing years. Next slide. That speaks to our goal around race equity and our vision, which is to foster a culture of belonging. Our commitment, is really to make investments in services, and try to get to better equitable outcomes. And part of that is my colleague, D'Angelo, who's doing a lot of dynamic and impactful work in Marin City in partnership with the Marin Community Services District or other partners in the CSD. You may have read, we also have a new Marin Housing Authority Executive Director, which I'm really excited about. We have active investments there in Golden Gate Village. We're meeting some milestones. That's for a nearly $300 million renovation project down there to renovate those hundreds of units. So we're excited about that. And this all ties to some of our work around race equity. Next slide. So what are our goals? I won't read them all. Everything from equitable access to services, to participatory budgeting, which the board has generously offered funding for, to the formation of our Civilian Oversight Commission. Next slide. Building climate resilient communities, and I want to steal the thunder of some of our partners are going to go into greater detail about this tonight. And when our new Chief Climate Officer arrives, I would suggest that you invite her as a speaker. I think you'll find her very dynamic and will provide, I think, a vision and probably some practical steps in which, we can continue to partner with the cities. But in running into the next slide, our vision is really to identify, innovate, and implement, based upon, evidence-based work, climate solutions that provide equitable outcomes to parties that are multi benefits that serve not only Marin today, but into the future. And so this is one of our biggest challenges, and there's really no, I would say, community that's not going to be impacted by climate change, sea level rise. And so we're really looking to capitalize that. And you'll see, moving into our next slide, some of our work program items. Our goal is to implement some policies and advance our resiliency. So we'll have our shoreline adaptation plans. I know many of you of the cities are already working on those, and we'll be working to stitch those together with the cities. Providing climate resiliency to support health outcomes, adaptation projects. We have some potential partnerships with Mill Valley and potentially with Sausalito. How can we work together on some of those common challenges? And then implement, related infrastructure projects, which there's going to be no shortage of in Marin County. Probably you all know, if you've heard me speak in the past, that a rough estimate of the cost of these interventions is, approaching, above $15 billion. And so, we're going to be better together, working together on some of these challenges for the future. Next slide. Other areas in terms of climate, we are launching our updated climate and adaptation team. So part of the reorganization is I aggregated a lot of the climate resources that were dispersed throughout the county to make a united team so that we had alignment and energy to get things done. We have a lot of studies in Marin County, and I think we are at the point where we need to advance solutions, and things aren't always going to be perfect, but I don't think we are in a period of inaction and study. We will do the studies when necessary. We'll do the planning along the bay side and on the shore side to meet those requirements and concurrently try to move forward efforts. For example, perhaps resurrecting some of the projects to protect State Route 101. We saw the big impacts during King Tide. And so how do we move forward on projects like that while we also work on those other important planning efforts? You see, advancing the Bothing multi-use pathway. The board took some actions a couple weeks ago to set that up for both implementation in the future. We also want to lead by example. How do we finalize the county's electrification plan for our fleet vehicles? How do we have dispersed charging facilities throughout the county? So for example, West Marin, Southern Marin, Northern Marin, so that our vehicles, our light duty vehicles can charge, and we can, where we can have electric vehicles for our light and medium duty fleet. And then preparing our teams for emergency response as well. Next slide. One of the other pieces that you may have heard me talk about is that the county has not had a strategic plan since 2001. So we'll be in the process of developing the first strategic plan, which I think is very important. I get asked this all the time by my employees, but also by community members. Where is Marin County going? What does 2050 look like? How do we, what is our approach on technology, infrastructure? What is our vision? And so I know having had the fortunate ability to lead teams in the past is that, that vision and that strategic plan will ultimately be our North Star to help guide our organization through, the invariable challenges and disruptions that will continue to happen along the way. So Uh, we'll be looking to you for inputs. We're in the process of finalizing a scope of work with a team that has done these types of strategic planning efforts for counties throughout California. And ultimately, the output is going to be the strategic plan. Next slide. So, this is, in effort, we'll be looking at ways, to coordinate from top down, from the Board of Supervisors with county leadership. We'll be engaging with your city managers and councils. We'll be using a lot of online surveys for you to give feedback, in addition to focus groups and community meetings to get input. We'll be meeting with business leaders, using, and then as I mentioned, community surveys, civic technology platforms. I had a chance with Supervisor Colbert, to go down to the Google campus to see how they're optimizing tools to engage with the community. And then ultimately, as we go to the next slide, this multifaceted approach will ultimately lead, to a county-wide strategic plan. You may be asking yourself, well, I hear about other planning efforts that are going on right now. How's this all going to come together? And I would say that this is a work in process. We've got an effort right now for West Marin. They're engaging on their own vision, given some of the challenges that are happening at the Point Reyes National Seashore. We've indicated to them that they need to take charge of their own destiny and come up with a vision so we can help support them in the community in which direction they want to go. You've also heard that we're on the process right now of developing an economic vitality strategic plan. All of these planning efforts are going to kind of, in some ways, inform each other along the way. And so as partner cities and partner agencies, as these processes move forward, we'll be very clear with all of you about the input that's needed, along the way, and then, using the information as needed to inform each of these three distinct planning efforts. Next slide. This is my last slide, which I always close with, which is just a reminder to people, and I know I'm probably speaking to the choir here, but to sign up for Alert Marin, and you can always subscribe for updates. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, etc. This is something I'm working on right now with our comms team. We're seeing a fair amount of uptick. We're really trying to get more subscribers on our social media. You'll eventually see we're trying to take a page out of Lynn's playbook and all the success that she had down in Mill Valley with their newsletter, and eventually have a community newsletter. She's working on a plan right now to emulate a lot of what you already do in your cities, but to get to a county newsletter out to all county residents. And so with that, thank you so much. I hope that really covered a lot of what you were hoping to hear tonight, Stephanie and Mayor. So I'll turn it back to you and would be open to get any questions.
Yes, you exceeded expectations. Thank you so much, Derek. Any questions from the public or from my colleagues? Go ahead, Pat. And we'll get a floating mic back there. But go ahead, Pat.
I have a couple, if that's okay. First of all, in your reorg, how did you work with the elected officials in that reorganization?
Great question. One of my bosses, Supervisor Walton Peter, she was president at the time. Yes. And when they brought forward the recommendation, they provided kind of I would say, a real clear understanding of what the objectives were, which were to, some of what I articulated. They wanted to see better synergy and cooperation and coordination across departments. They wanted more accountability. They wanted to have innovation, so they set forward, I would say, a vision and some goals, and ultimately that was used as a way to establish at least the recommendations and the alternatives that were ultimately brought to the Board of Supervisors. And just like I'm sure all of you have meetings with your city managers, I was throughout the process, having during my updates with, either the board officers or my individual board members, having conversations with them and socializing the different alternatives and really trying to gauge their input to ultimately bring forward a recommendation.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't specific. Don't we have an elected sheriff and don't we have an elected
We-
assessor?
We do. We have three. So we have an elected, assessor, clerk, recorder. We have an elected sheriff and an elected district attorney.
Right.
And so part of along the way was to coordinate with them. And so as you can imagine, they needed to see, well, what's in it for me? I'm an elected department head.
Right.
Why do I don't, and it was very clear with them. You don't report to the county executive. You won't report to an assistant county executive. But ultimately, what are the ways that we can support you? I was very clear that my office, we're a support department. We provide leadership and operational support. And so we were able to provide them, those department heads, examples, for example, in the criminal justice group, of how we could develop technology and systems that could help them do their job better. Or under the assessor, clerk, recorder, there was technology bridges that needed to be built that have languished for years between finance and the assessor. And so those were just examples where we could say, hey, these have been some pain points, and this reorganization will ultimately help you do your job better.
My second question is the Bay Conservation Development Commission is requiring all cities and counties that abut the bay to develop a regional shoreline adaptation plan. And I know Santa Fe's already hired, I think, their own consultant. But has there been any thinking about possibly bringing in some of the cities with the county and doing something like that? Because we share the shoreline in a lot of different areas. So I'm just kind of curious as to whether you had any discussion about that.
Yeah, that is certainly, that's been an area of discussion. And I think, Councilmember Eklund, you've had the opportunity to participate in some of those and, to look at that study with AECOM and look at alternatives. That is ultimately the goal. And we want to understand that ultimately give deference to the cities that, your cities better than the county does. And there may be reasons you want to participate and do your own plan. And we also, for perhaps some of the smaller cities that don't have the ability to do that, to make an offering to support having that unified approach. And where cities decide to go it alone, how do we make sure we're stitching those together in the future? Because we're going to have to, as a region, make coordinated decisions about implementation or coordinating policy, and so I think that is going to be some of the, the priority work. And you'll hear about some of this tonight. I mean, this is going to be, I think, MCF's pitch about how we're better together working on this. And so, I'm meeting tomorrow bright and early with the city manager in San Rafael, and this is one of our topics of conversation.
Great. So is this the task of the new person that's coming in?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, great. When does she arrive?
She starts remotely on May 15th, and then she arrives here in California on July 1st.
Okay.
So she's got to move her family out here from the state of New York. And so she's fortunately has got family in the Bay Area, and we're doing everything that we can to try to make sure her and her husband live here in Marin.
Great. Thank you.
Just a follow-up comment, the coordination and consolidation among the cities with the county to address climate change effects like sea level rise, I'm hoping will give us an opportunity to have a better shot at some of the funding that it requires.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is that on the horizon? What is it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we know that we're going to have a better chance when we cooperate. The last thing I think funders want to see is an application for grant funding from, I'm just using this as an example, is, this wouldn't happen, but the city of Novato and then the county of Marin, for adjacent or duplicating efforts. And so, part of the AECOM study is looking at, what will be the governance process for making some of those decisions, and how do we coordinate and collaborate to make sure that Marin County residents, have the best chance, when we're making those grant requests to the state, and we hope eventually to the federal government when we have, some policy shifts and potential some restoration of funding at the federal level.
Yep, Derek, thank you so much. I think there's I actually just downloaded your fix it, so it's good to get all the news. Of all the topics you covered, like I think the Department of Public Works, infrastructure, aging, climate, the two that are really large in my mind are health, the health department, and also housing. So I think a lion's share of your budget, 300 to 400 million, is health. What are some of the initiatives going to streamline that, to coordinate that?
Some of these are frankly going to be, and thank you for that question, are going to be forced by HR1. We're the rollback in some ways of ACA, when the American Care Act was passed and put into place in 2014, it was probably one of the most significant changes to services, in quite some time. And so we're expecting that there's going to be a lot of shift there. We're fortunate as a county to be able to provide extra services, beyond what is statutorily required by the federal and state government. Part of what the reorganization is going to do is take a look at, making sure that we're optimizing, our investments in health and human services. So we haven't done, an organizational assessment yet of HHS. That is on the horizon. There are some questions I have. So, for example, HHS has its own HR team. I have an HR department. They have, some resources dedicated to technology. So I really want to understand, is there duplication in some instances? The reality part of this is that much of the work that HHS does is largely prescribed by the state and federal government. So there isn't, as much as, it is a lot of funding that comes in, there isn't necessarily the latitude to innovate as you might expect. So a lot of it is fairly prescriptive. But that doesn't keep us, from trying new things or achieving the minimum outcomes that are expected by the state. You may have read, for example, on Care Court, this county leads the state of California out of all 58 counties on using restorative justice practices, through our Care Court investments. And so, nevertheless, I'm of the mind frame that, we can never, rest on our laurels, and we need to continue to be asking ourselves how we can do things better. And in some case, if the state or federal laws are preventing us from doing ways, providing services the most optimal way, I talked about the outset, we have a lobbyist, and we can always go to our state and federal partners to see about, can we change the regulations and systems to try to make sure we can optimize taxpayer dollars.
Thank you.
Any other questions I want to?
Are there any questions from the corner, or any questions from online attendees? If so, please raise your hand. I'm not seeing any raised hands.
Well, thank you so much. I know this was kind of an avalanche of information, so thank you so much for the return invitation.
Thank you, Derek.
Mayor.
Absolutely. Thank you. You're welcome back anytime. And yes, we will take note of welcoming. I'm sorry, what is her name? Your chief?
Nadia, and I'm forgetting her last name. It is, I think it.
Okay.
Sidran. It's a Hindi last name. I'm not quite sure. Sidran. Okay.
And so we will welcome her in the coming months. We'll look forward to that.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, I'm really delighted to introduce Jason Blau, who is the Chief Strategy Officer for Marin Community Foundation. He has a presentation of an analysis that is both fascinating and somewhat alarming, but I think it'll offer us some good discussion. His team has looked at the funding risks or the funding that comes through the federal government into Marin County and what we need to be thinking about should that funding get cut in the different sectors. So I think okay. Yeah, I'm going to get some water myself. We're going to take a quick. What did you think?
Oh, I thought it was really impressive. I can't believe they don't have a strategic plan since 2021. I know. 2001. And then I thought, well, does our town have a strategic plan? Is that our general plan? We don't really.
We have a
We do.
Yeah.
We don't have.
That identifies.
We don't have that. We just do it through our budget.
Yeah,
There's
But
nothing.
that doesn't give you any most project.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Maybe we could get to it once we finish dealing with the fire.
You can propose that, Terry. I'm not gonna, I'm a little reluctant to propose anything right now. Oh, we've had town facilities. We decided in 2020.
Okay, let's take our seats again. And Jason is joined by Serena Salgado.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay, take a seat.
Bad. It's bad. Totally bad. It's
So I hope you guys are going door to door.
All right. Well,
Okay,
as
wonderful.
people are gathering, I'll just say hi and make sure the mic works. Okay, we're good. Awesome. Thank you so much for inviting us to share tonight. Truly honored to be here. Really appreciate everyone taking their time. It's not lost on me that the Giants are playing the Dodgers tonight, and I know this is and the governor's debate, but
Yeah.
also Shohei Ohtani's pitching, so one of the two. But look, we're really proud as the Marin Community Foundation to show up not just as a funder in this community, which we are, but really as a part of this community. And that's really what drew Serena and I to this work. That's why our CEO, Ria Suh, wanted us to do the work that we're going to present tonight, because this is something that affects all of us. We just, as members of this community, were deeply concerned seeing the news out of DC, tracking things in Sacramento, and knowing what it could mean for this community. Before I jump into all of that, just briefly introduce myself. I'm Jason Blau. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at the Marin Community Foundation. Our team does two primary things. One, we do run some of the grant-making initiatives here in Marin on affordable housing and homelessness and on community resilience that Derek mentioned a few times. But then two, we also support our donors that are part of the MCF community to achieve as much as possible with their philanthropic vision. I joined MCF 2 years ago. Before that, I spent my career 16 years as a management consultant, working for largely the large private foundations, so the Hewlett Foundations, the Walton Family Foundations, folks like that. Let me ask my colleague Serena to introduce herself, and then we'll jump into the analysis.
Hello, my name is Serena Salgado. I'm a strategy analyst at the Marin Community Foundation. I joined a little over a year ago, also from a background in consulting. I worked at the Bridgeband Group, and before that, I was in higher education managing a college success program. So I'm very excited to have done this work and excited to share it with you guys today.
Okay, so I'm going to start a bit with the why and the how, and then we'll get into the what, and then we'll wrap up with kind of what this means for all of us here. So start with the why. As I mentioned earlier, we really did this because we wanted to get ahead of what we saw rolling downhill towards Marin. And some of that's parochial, right? As a funder, we need to be able to make funding decisions, and we can't do everything, right? We cannot replace the federal government, the state government, or even the county government to the extent funding is cut. But we can try to prioritize and make as much impact as possible. Even if we did have all the money in the world, though, we know that that's not enough. It takes coordination. It takes all of us here in this room working together to make something happen. So that's why we got to do it. How, I'll just try to hit the 4 points briefly that you see up on the slides. We did 4 basic things. we started by just what are the big moving pieces on the budget? What are the big pieces of legislation that are going to matter? That obviously starts with HR1, budgets in Sacramento, things like that. Two, we got our hands on roughly every piece of public spending data we could. The federal government's actually pretty good still about sharing that kind of thing, so that's good. Scoured all those databases. I'll note just that the last complete year is FY24. We're hoping we should be able to update this in the next few months with FY25 as that data comes in. Then we had to ask ourselves, well, what if this could be at risk? And I'll just own up front, that's somewhat subjective, right? You could have different assessments of what feels risky or not, depending on what's coming out of the White House on any given day. We did our best at it. Happy to talk about some of those kinds of things. And then lastly, we asked, okay, what would this mean for Marin were some of these things to get cut? And I'll just emphasize the bolded word on the slide, we estimated it, right? So this is not the word of God. This is not something that anyone knows for sure because we're dealing with the future. But we wanted to nonetheless try to get ahead, as I mentioned, of what could be coming and try to ask ourselves those questions. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. At the highest level, what I hope you take away from this presentation tonight is that we see this as a call to action, not a call to panic, okay? Because there are things we can do. I mean, first, actually, a lot of the funding that goes to Marin is likely stable. When I say likely, nothing's ever guaranteed. But even with all the news coming out, even with all the different threats, if you look back over the last year, what you'll see is that a lot of the time, the White House tries to do something, and maybe not as much as we all would like, but Congress pushes back. The courts, maybe not as much as we all would like, do push back, are able to fight some things. And that gives us some confidence going into the coming years. Now, that said, second point is not to say things are fine, right? We're looking at 40,000 approximately Marin residents at risk of losing their health care or deeply needed food assistance due to the different changes rolling through the programs that Derek mentioned. That's 1 in 7 Marin residents. That's a big deal. And that I think is, kind of requires all of us here to be taking serious action on it. Third, look at the people. So I don't know, I'll speak for myself. This may be true for some folks here. I think in terms of, policies, bill analysis, programs, but at the end of the day, we're talking about people who are on the receiving end of these cuts. And when you look at who is going to be harmed by these kinds of cuts, you overwhelmingly see immigrant communities and other marginalized populations that will face a disproportionate share of the harms. And that's not accidental. That is more or less the stated policy coming out of DC, and that is going to have an effect in Marin. But last but not least, again, we think Marin can act. Like, this is not foreordained. Better to act than to panic. We should be thinking about what funding streams we have locally that we can leverage to build some buffering and resilience against federal and state shifts. We have the ability to coordinate better, and I'm happy to talk about the thing Derek mentioned a few times with the partnership we started with the county on climate resilience. It's a great example of where we can make dollars go further just by avoiding duplication, recognizing where there are gaps, et cetera. We think the result of all those kinds of things will be a more resilient Marin. Okay, so now we're going to dive into some pretty weedy slides, and that's why I'm going to hand it to Serena. But we're happy to pause if folks have immediate questions. We can take questions at the end, but we'll try to walk through it as best as we can.
Thank you. So just to walk through our first slide, like Jason said, we're using federal fiscal year 24 data. So in fiscal year 24, Marin County received a little over $2 billion in direct funding from the federal government. So for example, in the healthcare research bucket, that's mostly NIH funding that goes directly to the Buck Institute to support their research on aging. The vast majority of that funding is actually Social Security funding that's paid directly to residents. But we zoomed in on the other non-Social Security funding so you can get a look at the issue areas there. Housing is the largest issue area, and the other ones sort of are evenly spread throughout, and that's around $571 million. Yeah. Of that funding, like Jason said, around 90% of those direct federal grants are likely stable. We took a look at all the funding and got some sense of what might make a grant stable, one of which is adequate federal appropriations. So during the last federal appropriations process, was there enough budget to keep those grants going? The second one, although not always reliable, successful litigation. There was some really great litigation that occurred that kept some funding intact. And so it allowed that funding to remain stable despite attempted cuts. And then there's mandatory funding. Social Security is a great example of that. That's funding that Congress cannot cut. It has to be dispersed. And so that is stable. Yep. So that leaves around $211 million that we've estimated to be at risk. This chart shows that funding by issue area and by our estimated risk factor. So the first bar you see is the terminated bar. So that's grants that have already been terminated, whether they were rescinded during HR 1. They may be expired programs like the American Rescue Plan, which was a lot of COVID funding, or funding from departments that may have been dismantled, namely USAID funding. Then we took a look at what was higher risk versus lower risk of funding loss. So in that higher risk bucket, you see that aforementioned NIH health research funding. There were some administrative policy changes that may put that funding at risk. There's also within that bucket infrastructure improvement funding that is expiring that Marin County was using for things like fixing the drainage on the 101 and 580 interchange. That funding is expiring, so there'll be less of that to go around. And then the last bucket there is public housing funding. So there was some pretty significant budget cuts to public housing at HUD. And so that might impact public housing in Marin. So this is a pretty intense slide. So I'll give you all a minute to take a look at it. But those are our big buckets.
I'll move us on, but we can always come back.
Great. So we acknowledge that direct to grantee funding is not the only funding that comes into Marin, namely two big programs, Medi-Cal and SNAP. The federal government allocates funding to the state of California, and then the state of California disperses that funding to the county. HR 1 introduced some serious administrative barriers, funding losses, eligibility reductions to Medi-Cal, SNAP, Covered California, our ACA provider. And we also took a look at HR 1 and its impacts and estimated that around 1 in 7 residents are at risk of losing or having reduced healthcare and or nutrition benefits, which is that 40K number. It's a pretty big proportion. So we just wanted to name that here as well. I'll turn it back to Jason to talk about impacts.
So this will be the first of 3 slides on what this means for how we take this forward. And we wanted to pull out some of the bigger harms from the cuts Serena just described. And honestly, we could have picked more than 6. But I think these 6, can read the specifics, but even if you just look across them, one thing I think you'll notice is that they'll likely harm, a large portion of the county generally, and the harshest parts will fall on those least able to deal with it. So just to pick 2 examples, housing, there are at least 30 mixed status families in public housing in Marin that are at risk of losing that housing should some of the rule changes that the White House has put forward take place, right? So we're doing, I know a lot of you are all working on trying to reduce homelessness as much as possible. This is going to make that harder, and it's going to be particularly hard on those families. Disaster relief. Without FEMA, it's those who can afford to kind of self-insure in a way that are best able to deal with it. And that's not a kind of abstract hypothetical. We're already seeing this in Los Angeles after the fires, right? That those with the means to buy a new piece of property, pay contractors, et cetera, they're already rebuilding. They're rebuilding a lot faster than those without those means. And what that's also doing is that's putting additional pressure on county and local governments in Southern California to then support those families that don't have the means to help themselves. So this becomes, even if you're lucky enough that the next wildfire or flood doesn't ruin your house, you as a taxpayer, one way or another, right, end up on the hook for this. So that's why we want to bring the population focus in. Right, let's go. All right. Now, all that said, this is not unmitigatable, right? So I want to call it two big ways in which that's true. On the left, we've got just the role that state funding and local funding plays in this. And Serena called this out earlier. The fact that the federal spending on healthcare, on food assistance is decreasing, California has a choice, right? And budgets are tight. I won't get into the whole Sacramento budgeting process, but nonetheless, the budget is a choice. And with greater state support, there are ways to help people stay on health insurance, reduce their premiums, have access to food assistance. Conversely, if Sacramento acts differently, we're going to see the harsher results that you see on the bottom of the slide. Greater reductions in SNAP means more people going hungry. That's a quite possible outcome of this. On the right-hand side of the slide, I want to call it something that's not as much of a budget thing, because even if you want to say, well, look, money's tight, budgets are hard, et cetera, which we agree, there are still a lot of things that are under control of local government. And I do want to shout out the county and especially HHS for really taking a lead on a lot of this stuff and getting ahead of it, right? There's some, I don't want to say simple, but not super costly things you can do to communicate what's happening, to help people demonstrate that they're working, right, which is going to end up being a requirement for some food assistance, to improve the kind of back-end systems that make it easier for people to enroll in benefits, to stay in benefits. That's going to make a big difference in the coming years. And then finally, taking advantage of the fact that it's a relatively small population county and providing some direct assistance to those who need it most without completely breaking the bank. All right, so where does that leave us? If you ask me, if you ask Serena, if you ask our colleagues at the Marin Community Foundation, you really see one big thing, which is sustained coordinated action. That's where we're seeing the most bang for our buck across so many different things. And the partnership with the County on Climate is a good example of this, where our Resilient Communities Initiative has a budget of $5 million a year. That's a fair amount of money. It gets you like 3 days through a project to actually do some climate resilience engineering on the Bay Coast, right? Like that's just not enough. But what we're seeing is that in working with the county, with partners around the county, we're able to make those dollars go a lot further. We're able to help bring down, and this was a question earlier, one of our big goals is to provide assistance to applicants for state funding, to try to get more of that state funding into Marin. We think that kind of thing's possible. I've heard Derek say in different venues a few times that Marin is resource rich but coordination poor. Our fundamental view is that if we can improve the coordination, get a lot more done. And that's what we're hoping comes out of tonight. We did toss up some other ideas on the slide. I don't know if they're right or not. We at least want to start the conversation. Public sector, what would it look like to establish some more reliable funding streams? Philanthropy, our big thing is going to be how can we build better partnerships across the county with the cities, with the county, with the different NGOs. We are also raising money to try to handle some of the direct harms to the extent folks are willing to be generous and charitable. It's absolutely part of our mission to further that. You may have seen last fall the Food on Every Table Fund. This is when SNAP was getting paused and those checks weren't going out. We jumped in. The county was extremely generous. I mean, folks giving very large checks, but also folks sending in a few bucks that they could just to help their neighbors. That stuff really adds up. It makes a big difference. And we're proud to be the facilitator of that throughout the county. So that's what we've got. Again, wanted to more start a conversation than end a conversation. Would love to hear what ideas are on your mind. Happy to answer any questions you have about the analysis, where we see this going. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. The first is, do you have a demographic and geographic cut of the county population that is affected so that we know specifically where to target?
So we have pretty good data on food because that's tracked at a better geographic level. On health insurance, I'm not sure if we do.
The covered California data on who, was getting those premium tax credits that are being not renewed is at the county level. And I don't know, maybe you could work with Covered California to get more local data. And then Medi-Cal is kind of a whole different horse. I think we have a sense of which people might be affected by new administrative barriers, but that's more on the demographic level than on the geographic level.
Okay. And the second is more specific to MCF. You manage about $850 million of donor-advised funds. Has there been any policy discussion at the foundation about activating those donors towards these specific local challenges at scale?
Yeah, really glad you asked that because that's a big thing we're trying to figure out. So just so folks are kind of clear on the context, a solid portion, I don't know if it's a majority of not, of our donor assets under management are from people outside of Marin, right? And even folks within Marin may have very broad geographic interests and they may want to give to things broader in the Bay Area or the college they went to, et cetera. What we have found is that since we started our strategic plan, our new strategic plan a few years ago, is that the more we engage with our donors, the more they're interested in listening to us. But for a long time, that wasn't really our stance as an organization. And I think we can own the missed opportunities that created. We were operating more as a bank than as an asset. So we have started to build deeper relationships with many of our donors. And, we're honest about what we care about, and we care about our home. And we think there's lots of really important work to be doing in Marin, and we're having at least some success in those conversations. Related are things like the Food on Every Table Fund, where we're setting those kinds of things up. And for lack of a better phrase, we're pitching them to our donors, regardless of where they live. Now, do I expect a donor who doesn't live in California to care a ton about Marin? I think we need to be realistic about that. But we certainly see our mission as trying to support the community we live and work in. Yeah, of course.
I have a question or comment. Follow up on that, if that's okay. I have some experience with a nonprofit in Sausalito, and there are many, many nonprofits who seek capacity grants to achieve, in a small way, many of the goals that you've set forth here. And I just want to compliment MCF for having supported many of them. And I'll give you one example that's historic. The housing fund went into the liveaboards at Galilee Harbor. So there was a time when people were thinking very creatively, how do we deal with the housing crisis and provide truly affordable housing anywhere in Marin? And at least Sausalito would hope to expand through BCDC the authority of local marinas to have a higher percentage of liveaboards. And these are truly navigable vessels, et cetera. And I'm guessing that many of the locals will come to you again and say, we'd like to expand that program. And it's a little thing, except it means really affordable housing. Unlike almost anything else in Marin, it's pretty efficiently done. So I just wanted to mention that as a small thing. So each of our cities facing that problem may have very different approaches, and we may need some help in terms of energizing not just our local governments, but also the nonprofits who are well positioned in some cases to really help out. So thank you for what you're doing and for this high level approach to where the problems are. Thanks.
Very, very much appreciate that. And I'll just take a moment to say that we do have our grant making programs. We also have our community capital initiative, which provides low interest loans. And that may not be specifically applicable in that case, but just as you're thinking about your communities and how MCF can partner with you, we've had actually great success, including from getting donors moving DAF funds, their donor advised funds, instead of being fully invested in the stock market, to invest in their community. They're put into that low interest loan fund, and that's been hugely helpful as well.
So I have a relatively uninspired, naive question, but on your slide, under philanthropy ideas, what does it mean to identify highest priority needs instead of attempting to backfill?
Yeah. So I'm just going to slide back to Serena's slide on what could be at risk. So one way we could try to manage this situation is that every time a grant gets cut or a program gets defunded, we could say, you know, there was $24 million in infrastructure improvement money coming to the county. That money's going away. We need to find $24 million. We can't do that. We don't have the funds for it. And I think if we even tried to do that, we wouldn't have the ability to focus on where we think the need is greatest. So instead, what we're trying to ask is, where are the harms going to be felt in our county the most deeply, and be able to work from there. Very much better said than I did. Thank you.
I have a question. Perhaps going back to your original slide, your last slide where you had philanthropic, I'm just wondering, this may not be a role for MCF, but I wonder about partnering through MCF with private foundations to help fill the gaps. Is this a role that MCF can play to start bringing additional funds in, where you say prioritize the main needs rather than trying to fill every need, which we can't do? So is that something that you guys do, kind of brokering with
Absolutely.
private foundation?
Yeah, and I would love to have a conversation about this, because that is absolutely something not only we do, but we would like to do even more of. To be totally honest, we have struggled a bit, even with Bay Area foundations, to say nothing of national foundations, of overcoming the stereotypes of
Right.
Marin of, why would I put money into Marin?
Yes, we're all in hot tubs and we're all rich.
Yes.
And they have a hard time relating that there are people that generally are in need here. So I would think with your prior work, you might have some networking opportunities. That I get it.
Yeah.
Overcoming that stereotype is really tough. But I think with your background and with MCF's knowledge of what's really going on here, we're not all in hot tubs.
Agreed. We're certainly trying. We are proud to be a founding member, and our CEO is on the steering committee of something called the Community Foundation Climate Collaborative, getting community foundations from around the country, including places that look very different from Marin, Baton Rouge, right? Very different political valences on top of everything else, to be learning from each other, working together on climate resilience, and getting private foundation money into this kind of thing. And so that's been, it's still early days on that, but we're hoping that that vehicle helps as well.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you.
I had a couple quick questions. One is if you could say a little bit more about the housing program, the affirmatively furthering fair housing, and also your metrics, like just at a general level, how do you guys measure successes of your programs? If you could maybe give an example of one that's really succeeded and one that is really not.
Sure. So our Affordable Housing and Homelessness Initiative has two primary goals. One, to expand affordable housing, and two, to reduce unsheltered homelessness. And so we have metrics, essentially outcome metrics for both parts of that. The affordable housing metrics are tied to the RENA goals, and at the different income levels, they more or less, track, okay, how much progress would we need to make on this to be making progress towards the RENA goals. And the homelessness metrics are tied to the PIT count, the point in time count on unsheltered homelessness. I'll just take a moment further on the strategy in that initiative to your first question. On affordable housing and homelessness, on the affordable housing piece, again, we don't have the money to create a ton of units. I mean, I think it's fair to say that unfortunately, $800,000, $900,000 unit, like that's just too much money. And with $5 million a year, doesn't get you very many units. So we're actually working to try to find ways to creatively reduce that cost and to work in community to try to identify places that can be suitable for more affordable housing and reduce some of the barriers towards that. On homelessness, this really came out of a strategy with the county and with nonprofits around the county and around the Bay Area. The big gap we saw was on preventing homelessness. So there's all kinds of supports and funding going into permanent supportive housing, which is great. There's all kinds of supports going into social services, which is great. There should be more, et cetera, et cetera. But there wasn't really dedication on stopping people from becoming home. There wasn't as much dedication on stopping people from becoming homeless in the first place. So we've actually partnered with the county and with an entity called All Home that also brought some outside of the county money in, which was great, to set up a homelessness prevention system that provides different supports to families that are on the brink of but not yet homeless. It's too early to know if that's working or not. It's just getting set up now. But I will say personally, I'm pretty excited about it because if we can stop the inflow into homelessness, there's actually a fair amount of homelessness resolution going on every year. And we think that'll be a way to drive the number down. Yeah, happy to talk further about it.
But I do also, could you go back to the data slide?
The scary one.
Yeah, so when you were answering Alice's question, for example, the 24 million, where would in the infrastructure, where would the most harm be, and try to backfill based on priority, right? Can you discuss the public housing and so that 18 million, is that vouchers? Like what exactly is that? And do you have that by geography within the county?
Yeah, so that public housing grant money is actually really interesting. So it comes from what's called the Public Housing Operating Fund within Housing and Urban Development. And that fund is for public housing, like government run public housing, to be able to do things like maintenance and maintaining the units, that type of work. And so Marin Housing Authority is our sort of administrator of public housing here in Marin County. And so all of their public housing units, if there is a reduction in their operating money, will have to kind of figure out how they'll maintain the homes and make sure that things stay clean and that housing is suitable for people. So there we have sort of, this is all of our units, and we're going to have to figure out across those how to maintain that funding if that funding were to go away.
Just add a quick piece here, which is the White House has made a few different runs at community continuity of care funding over the last year that would have even greater impacts than what's described on this slide. Thankfully, there's been pushback, not just from places like Marin, but from all around the country that have so far forestalled that. But it certainly seems to be an area in which the White House has wanted to take shots at. And we expect that those will continue. And we are working with our nonprofit partners that are operating all kinds of different housing in Marin to try to scenario plan on what that could look like and how they can not replace the funding, because that's not going to happen, but at least mitigate it as much as possible.
Closer look at the slides. Okay.
It's all good.
Any hands raised? Oh, if you would like to ask a question and you're on the Zoom, please raise your hand. Oh, go ahead, Terry.
Is it possible to get a copy of these slides?
Yep.
That would be great.
Yeah,
Thank
we'll
you.
send it to the whole distribution. We'll make sure everyone gets it.
Yeah, thank you.
And does anyone have any commentary about, or do you want to expand on the whole coordination effort? Like one question I had, if you want to go forward to that slide, is are there any counties that you feel are doing a good job that we could look to for inspiration or a model?
That's a good question.
while you're thinking, is it because we have 11 jurisdictions? Is that, I mean, you can just, we know. We get in our own way. Is that part of it?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
It's interesting. Prior to taking this job, I did a lot of work in LA County, which has even more jurisdictions than Marin County. But I think even the folks there would tell you that makes a lot of things a lot harder. And yet, in part because the fires were such a galvanizing moment, I would give credit to the California Community Foundation down there. Not without issue in different ways, but folks are doing a pretty good job of pulling together and making some things happen that wouldn't otherwise. I think to talk about our colleagues, since I don't know the county governments as well, but the San Diego Foundation has really strong partnerships with the county government and also some different cities in San Diego County that tends to work pretty well. I think even separate from the question of who should we emulate, I might venture to say I think all of us here actually have a pretty good sense of what needs to happen in terms of identifying to the prior question, where are the needs, who are the people who need it, and how can we take a whole of government approach, regardless of level of government, to delivering those things. Derek and I were just catching up before the start of the meeting on the different supports going to immigrant communities in the county. They're really fragmented. And that's partially on us as a funder. We fund all kinds of different NGOs to try to protect immigrant communities, done with the best of intentions, right? We want to make sure people have services, but the result is a fair amount of fragmentation. So how are we going to get to something my team is working on now? How are we going to get to a more unified system where everyone in the county knows when something happens, this is who I can turn to? And all the NGO coordination is essentially happening in the background, and they don't have to get told, oh, go here, oh, go here, go here, et cetera. And the same thing's true in the public sector.
Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you so very,
Really
very much.
appreciate it.
Yes. Let's see. Is that it? Do I just adjourn? So our next meeting will be held at the Homeward Bound of Marin on Hamilton, North Hamilton Parkway up in Novato. And the date for that meeting is May 27th. I will not be in town, but our Vice President, Gabe Paulson, will lead you. Thank you so much. Meeting adjourned.
Okay.